The sun hung low over the rugged frontier town of Silver Creek, casting long shadows across the dusty streets. It was a place where men made deals, and debts were paid in any way they could be settled. Most debts were settled with silver or gold, but in this town, a man could also lose his life over the smallest of promises. Gage Montgomery had been to many towns like this, but none had quite the same feeling as Silver Creek. His job was simple. He collected debts. He was a debt collector, a man who had no room for emotions or hesitation. He was cold, efficient, and always got the job done. Whether the debtor was a small farmer or a powerful landowner, it didn't matter to Gage. Money was owed, and he made sure it was paid. Gage had been hired by Jeremiah Whitaker, a wealthy landowner with holdings all over the region. Whitaker had lent a large sum of money to Chief Running Elk, the leader of a local Apache tribe, several years ago. The debt had grown over time, and now Whitaker was demanding payment. It wasn't just the money at stake. Whitaker wanted to prove a point. He had tried to reason with the Apache people, but they refused to pay, claiming the debt was unfair and based on broken promises. Whitaker's patience had run out, and he had sent Gage to settle the matter once and for all. Gage rode into town early in the morning, his horse, Hawk, kicking up dust as they trotted down the main street. The sun was rising slowly behind him, a reminder that the day would be long and unforgiving. He checked the strap of his saddlebag, making sure his rifle was secure. It was a tool he used often, but today he hoped he wouldn't need it. He was here to collect, not to fight. He stopped at the local saloon to gather information. Inside, the smell of stale beer and sweat filled the air. A few rough-looking men sat at the bar, their faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats. They didn't look up as Gage entered, but he knew they were watching him out of the corner of their eyes. The tension in the room was thick, and Gage could feel it in his bones. He walked to the bar, placing a few coins down. The bartender, a gruff man with a thick beard, eyed him warily. "What do you want?" the bartender asked, his voice low. "I'm here to see Chief Running Elk," Gage replied. "I've come to settle a debt." The bartender paused, wiping his glass slowly. "You sure you want to do that?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "Things have been tense lately. The Apache don't take kindly to outsiders." Gage's jaw tightened. He had been to enough rough places to know what the bartender meant. But he wasn't afraid. "I'm just doing my job," he said. "I don't want trouble. I just want to get what's owed." The bartender sighed, setting down the glass. "Fine. The chief's camp is just outside town. But don't expect a warm welcome. If you're not careful, you might find yourself in a much deeper hole than you're prepared to dig." Gage nodded and walked out of the saloon. He had heard warnings like this before, but they didn't scare him. His mind was set on one thing, the debt. It had to be paid. The ride to the Apache camp was slow and silent. The land here was rugged, a mix of dry grasslands and rocky hills. The air was thick with dust, and the wind howled through the trees. Gage's eyes scanned the horizon, but all he could see were the rolling hills and the occasional scattering of wildlife. There was no sign of the Apache people, but he knew they were watching. As he approached the camp, Gage spotted several Apache warriors standing guard near the entrance. They didn't move as he rode closer. Their eyes locked on him. Gage's hand rested lightly on the hilt of his revolver, but he made no move to draw it. He wasn't here to start a fight. At the center of the camp stood Chief Running Elk, a tall man with a commanding presence. His face was weathered and scarred, a testament to years of leadership and survival. He was surrounded by his council, a group of wise men and women who advised him on matters of war and peace. The chief stepped forward as Gage dismounted. "You've come to collect?" he asked in a voice that was deep and steady. There was no anger in his tone, just a calm acceptance. Gage nodded. "I've come to settle the debt," he said. "Whitaker's been waiting for his money." Running Elk studied him for a long moment, then motioned for Gage to follow him. They walked toward the edge of the camp, away from the others. "You are a man of your word, I can see that," Running Elk said. "But this debt, it is not as simple as you think. It is not just money we owe. It is a matter of honor, and that is something that cannot be settled by coin." Gage felt a flicker of doubt in his chest, but he pushed it aside. He had been to many places like this, and every time the people had tried to justify their refusal to pay. But the truth was simple. A debt was a debt, and it needed to be paid. "I understand," Gage said. "But it is Whitaker's money, not mine. You'll have to settle with him." Running Elk paused, his eyes narrowing. Perhaps, but there is another way to settle this. He turned toward the camp, his gaze resting on one of the women standing near the fire. The woman was striking, tall and strong with dark hair and piercing eyes. She wore the traditional dress of the Apache, a reminder of her heritage and strength. She looked at Gage with curiosity, but there was no fear in her expression. "This is etched, my daughter," Running Elk said. "She is one of the leaders of our people, and she believes there is another way to resolve this." Etched stepped forward, her eyes meeting Gage's with a mixture of challenge and understanding. "If you wish to settle the debt, you must prove your worth," she said, her voice calm but firm. Gage raised an eyebrow. "Prove my worth?" he asked, unsure of what she meant. Etched smiled slightly, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Yes, you will face me in a test of skill. If you win, we will pay the debt. But if I win, you must marry me and stay with us as part of our tribe." "The choice is yours," Gage blinked in surprise. Marriage to an Apache woman? It was an unexpected turn, but it intrigued him. He had heard stories of Apache women being strong and independent, but he hadn't expected this kind of challenge. He looked at her, weighing the situation. This wasn't what he had expected when he came to collect a simple debt, but somehow it felt right. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for something more than money. "I accept," he said finally, his voice steady. Etched nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Then let us begin." As the sun sank lower in the sky, Gage and Etched prepared for the challenge. Neither of them knew what the outcome would be, but one thing was certain: their lives would never be the same again. The sun had dipped behind the hills, leaving only a dim orange glow over the camp. The air had cooled, but there was no mistaking the tension that hung thick in the air. Gage stood tall, his muscles tense, facing Etched, the woman who had given him an impossible choice. She was not just any woman. She was the daughter of Chief Running Elk, a leader of the Apache people, and now she was offering him a challenge, one that could change the course of his life forever. The camp was still, except for the sounds of the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional crackle of the fire. Etched had chosen the challenge and Gage had accepted. But now as he looked at her, he wondered if he had truly understood what he had signed up for. Etched was strong, confident, and determined. Everything about her seemed to radiate power. She stood barefoot in the dust, her long dark hair tied back in a braid, her sharp eyes never leaving Gage. She was ready for whatever came next. "I'll explain the rules," Etched said, her voice steady and clear. "We will race across the valley. First one to reach the old oak tree on the far side wins." Gage nodded. The race seemed simple enough, but he knew there was more to it than just running. In the wild, everything was a test of endurance, strength, and willpower. He had faced many challenges in his life, but something told him this one would be unlike anything he had ever encountered. He glanced over at Chief Running Elk, who watched silently from a distance. The chief's expression was unreadable, but there was a sense of pride in his eyes. He had not protested when his daughter had challenged Gage, which meant he trusted her judgment. The stakes were high. Etched moved to the starting line, her feet light on the earth, ready to begin. Gage followed her, standing a few paces behind. His heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the thrill of the challenge. This wasn't just about settling a debt. It was about proving something, about testing himself in a way he had never done before. "Are you ready?" Etched asked, her voice cutting through the quiet night. Gage nodded, his eyes fixed on her. He wasn't sure what would happen after the race, but he knew one thing. This was no longer about a simple debt. This was about something deeper, something that connected him to her and her people in a way he hadn't expected. "Ready," Gage replied. "Then let us begin." At her signal, Etched sprang forward, her feet barely touching the ground as she raced into the darkness. Gage's muscles tensed and he quickly followed, pushing himself to match her pace. The wind rushed past him as he ran, the sound of his boots hitting the earth the only noise he could hear. The valley stretched out before them, wide and empty, the path marked only by the occasional brush and rocks. For the first few minutes, Gage kept up with Etched, but he soon realized she was faster than he had anticipated. Her movements were graceful and efficient, her body flowing with the rhythm of the land. It wasn't just her physical speed. There was something else in the way she moved, something that seemed to connect her to the earth itself. Gage, for all his strength and skill, couldn't match her natural grace. As they reached the halfway point, Gage began to feel the burn in his legs. His breath was coming in heavy gasps, but etched didn't show any signs of slowing down. She was a blur of motion ahead of him, her long braid whipping in the wind. Gage pushed harder, determined not to lose. He had faced many trials before, battles, gunfights, long rides through the desert, but this felt different. This wasn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It was about endurance. It was about something deeper, something inside himself that he didn't fully understand. He caught a glimpse of etched as she reached the edge of the valley, the old oak tree now clearly in sight. She was close, but Gage wasn't ready to give up just yet. With every ounce of energy he had left, he pushed himself harder, his legs burning with the effort. He felt his heartbeat thumping in his chest, but he kept moving, his eyes fixed on the oak tree ahead. Etched reached the tree first, her feet touching the ground with a soft thud. She had won the race, but there was no smugness in her victory. She simply stood there, breathing heavily, her eyes watching Gage as he approached. Gage reached the tree moments later, his chest heaving with exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, his body trembling from the effort. Etched turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Well done," she said, her voice steady but full of respect. "You have endurance, Gage Montgomery." But this was only the first test. Gage looked at her, confusion crossing his face. "There's more?" Etched smiled, but it wasn't a smile of mockery. It was a smile of understanding. "There is always more. Life is full of tests, and each one leads to something greater." Gage took a deep breath, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What happens now?" Etched took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "Now you must choose. The race was not just to test your physical strength. It was to test your heart. If you truly wish to stay with us, to honor the debt that Whitaker claims, you must become part of our people. You must choose the path of honor, of loyalty, and of respect for the land. Will you do this, Gage Montgomery?" Gage's mind raced. This wasn't just about the debt anymore. It was about something far more important. About the future, about choices, and about the life he had been living. He had always been a man of action, a man who took what he needed and moved on. But now, standing before etched, he saw a different way. A way of life rooted in honor and respect. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he said slowly, his voice unsure. "But I know one thing. I don't want to leave here without understanding what you're offering." Etched nodded as if she had been expecting this answer. "Then stay with us for a while. Learn. The choice will not be forced upon you. But know this. If you stay, you will learn more than you ever thought possible." Gage looked at her, seeing her not just as the woman who had challenged him, but as someone who had shown him another way. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure where his path was leading, but he knew that wherever it went, etched would be a part of it. As the stars began to appear in the sky above, Gage made his decision. He would stay. Not for the debt, not for Whitaker's money, but for something deeper, something that had been awakened within him during the race. "All right," Gage said, his voice steady. "I'll stay. I'll learn." Etched's smile grew wider, and this time there was no mistaking the warmth in her eyes. "Welcome, Gage Montgomery. You have made the right choice." The two stood together under the night sky, the land around them still and quiet. The future was uncertain, but for the first time Gage felt a sense of peace. He wasn't just a debt collector anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that mattered. And in that moment he knew that his life would never be the same again.